it's okay if we build the roads in our community, but when it comes to the interstates, the government will have to lead that way. I mean, we can build the roads, but it's just it's a mute point if government's going to come in and then do it themselves. So I think this is where we need a little bit more leadership from US and a little bit more push, if nothing else, to get these things done.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Future Proof, where we talk about the state of digital identity. Today I have with me again Global ID co-founder and CEO Mitja Simčić. Mitja, how's it going?
Going pretty well. How about you, Alec?
Not too bad. Getting over a little chest cold, so my voice is a little off kilter today, but I think we'll manage. I've heard you've been having a little bit of fun. I know you were at this Georgetown Law roundtable on digital identity last week. I'm looking at this list of participants, and all I'm really seeing are heavy hitters, right? You got the SEC, New York State Department of Finance, Financial Services, right? Department of Treasury, NIST, OpenAI is there. You got Brazil, Mexico, the EU. Yeah, wow. Financial institutions as well. MasterCard, Capital One, McKinsey. And then, of course, your digital identity players, wallet providers, you got Prove, and, of course, Global ID. What was this? What was this all about, man?
Yeah, so we got invited to Georgetown Law University kind of roundtable on digital identity, and it was pretty good. It was split up in four different parts. The first part was where the public sector kind of came in and presented what they're working on in terms of digital identity. Then we got a chance to present the private sector. Then came the technical standards groups that presented their work, and lastly, we did this workshop where we were asking certain questions where academia could help and so on. And yeah, it was great being in a room full of people where we didn't have to explain why digital identity is important. So I was kind of like a refreshing thing, and we were really focused more on kind of trying to find solutions on how we can actually bring this to the market. And hearing from all the heavy hitters that you mentioned, and it was just really cool to see and hear how much work actually is being done everywhere when it comes to digital identity, and not just excuse me, not just US, but also EU and Latin America and other countries.
I think, for people like you and I who are sort of working on a lot of these technology platforms, everyone's always a little bit impatient, for things to happen or maybe for regulations to pass. But I think to your point, it is cool, really cool to learn that there is actually a ton of work going on, and all these entities are super knowledgeable about a lot of these topics, and some of them are actually really excited about the possibilities of some of these technologies. I know one of the themes that you mentioned was pretty key was around standards. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was actually pretty cool that we had this slide on where all the standards and different organizations were presented. It was just everybody knew that's overwhelming. So it was kind of like we pleaded with everybody that we don't, at the end of the day, the standards that are out there are all pretty good. They all have the pros and cons. But ideally, for the sake of everybody, I think the government should push for us like a set of those standards. Doesn't have to be a big set, obviously, but that, because that's going to help not just within certain country, but also when countries talk to each other and they are willing to exchange those credentials or accept those credentials. And I've seen a lot of good things happening from the EU side of things. I think when it comes to their kind of push, it's actually really good. They're still leaving the member states to kind of pick some of those things, but they're telling them, hey, but this is what we are expecting you to do. And one good thing came from even, for example, Latin America, and namely either Brazil, where the central bank came up with the concept of Pix, which is a service where you can exchange money easily, peer to peer or peer to business. And in a short span of 3 years, they were able to kind of, I think they have now over 80% of population 14 years or older is using pics. So like if it is something, but and then we ask why, but how is that possible? Because we're trying this also in other countries, and the best answer they could give was that in a way they are letting competition play out. They let central bank to come in, define some of the rules, but then they let all the fintechs to come in and actually kind of take over. So I think that's a good thing, because they are in a way fertile ground for anybody working on digital identity or fintech space.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Once you know the rules of the game, you end up having quite a few players, and I think competition is always going to be good for the end consumer, good for society. I That is the tough thing with standards, right? It always sounds so simple, but it's always this complicated web to actually get standards done, or to have them be effective. It reminds me of that XKCD comic. I think it's like some, there's 14 standards, and then someone's like, oh, you know what we need? We need a unifying standard, that we can all agree on. And then, the next frame is like, oh, now there's 15 standards. And so,
Yes, but yeah, we need to standardize the standards. So as absurd as that might he, I mean, as absurd as that might sound, that is the case. But there are some good things happening. I heard from some people, for example, even G20, G7 countries are working together to kind of trying to define, okay, if we have this standard, are you going to accept it? And if we have that standard, are we going to accept it? And so on. So there are talks going on, which I think is good. I think the key takeaway is that it has become inevitable that countries now realize digital identity like is just a must. It's not even an option going forward. And I think they've been talking about this, but being in a full room of people who just accept this, it was again refreshing to say the least.
yeah, that's great to hear. And I think your Brazil example is really good as well, because it just shows what is possible when when you have sort of that leadership from the public sector, and then driving and fostering that competition within the private sector. Um, how do you see that, I guess, playing out in the U.S. based on what you've learned, right? Because I think here that's in a way what a lot of people are waiting for or excited for is that sort of leadership from the public sector to really allow all this innovation and competition to flourish.
I would say there's a lot of talk, but we still have to do some things. There were talks about certain bills being prepared, and they need to go through different institutions and so on. Just comparing US and EU, I would say EU is further ahead, in certain instances, much further ahead. But it doesn't mean that the US is like completely without the digital identity strategy or anything like that. I think kind of the main problem was, and maybe I'm taking too much of a global ID stance on this, but we are trailblazers in a way. So US is allowing private sector to do things, but it's okay if we build the roads in our community, but when it comes to the interstates, the government will have to lead that way. I mean, we can build the roads, but it's just it's a mute point if government's going to come in and then do it themselves. So I think this is where we need a little bit more leadership from US and a little bit more push, if nothing else, to get these things done. And we've seen a lot of these things where they're just letting the states basically decide what they do, how they do it. So we see a lot of mobile driver's licenses already out there and so on. But also, I've heard that those programs are not as successful as they wanted to be because of the adoption on the other side, because you don't have all the institutions within a certain state using them. But one cool takeaway from all of it was how to present this to maybe others that are still thinking about digital identity and so on, is the amount of money they could save if digital identity was implemented. And there's still a lot of money just going down the drain to pretty much assure that all the citizens can do government stuff. Uh, but yeah, with digital identity, that could save a ton of money.
Yeah, I really love that example about the interstate highway, right? Because I at a certain scale, the government's just going to have to get involved. Um, and when you talk about something like digital identity, people's trust, that's talk about scale. That's everyone, right? And it always sort of brings me back to just this concept. I know for us, we always think about sort of these three core pillars, right? Like one is the trust and the identity. The other is communications, and then the third is this value, payments, transactions, or just being able to hold value as sort of the three pillars of maybe what a modern individual needs to traverse like this world, the global economy, right? And the thing with the internet is that those original protocol, like the internet nailed the communications part of it in a way, but what it always sort of missed was the trust and the value. um we're seeing the value stuff play out, you know right now, which is sort of very exciting. And it sort of feels like trust is this final frontier. And it's going to be super exciting to see how all of that comes together. I know on Monday, when I met with you and you were back from this, I could feel your energy and your excitement. Do you want to talk about some of the things that really excited you, and maybe you can put on your global ID hat a little bit for that?
It was very cool. So um, the roundtable first, the public sector presented, and then the private, and I was presenting in the private sector. And I started by saying the most used word up until now that everybody used was trust. So it was very easy for me to present like what Global is trying to do. And it was we had really good conversations, even from the other standards organizations and so on. And they even said after my speech, hey, but verifiable credentials is only one part of the equation. The other part needs to be this trust building. Like you can't just trust and rely completely on verifiable credentials. And then I had a very easy answer. I said, that's exactly why we're building the communications platform. This is like where it's going to happen. And obviously it's not going to happen so much in real life as it is going to happen in the digital life going forward. So, I mean, one thing that excited me the most was just seeing how global ID positioning seems to be completely correct on where the world's going. So it's just the world maybe hasn't caught up yet, and we still have a ton of work to do. We still have a ton of things to build. But it was really like that, just how well positioned we are excited me the most out of the whole roundtable, to be honest.
Well, when you're getting validation from heavy hitters like that must feel pretty good. Um,
Yeah, and it was not just, it was like when I talked to different people, they were interested in maybe issuing verifiable credentials into our wallet, or there were a ton of other things. Like they were very interested in what we're trying to do with the vouchers and the trust graph, which is something I don't think we have shared publicly, but it's not a secret. Maybe we can do another podcast on it. But there's a lot of things that excited me, and I was able to, I think, excite other folks to kind of engage further, and kind of just figure out how we can actually do digital identity in the future.
yeah, I mean, I feel like for me, just hearing you talk about it, um, one of the things that really struck me is just that like the thinking and the understanding is already very deep, and they're all very fluent in all of these new technologies and tools, right? Really, what's just missing now is that education, is that coming together of public and private, and actually getting things done so we can start offering some of these exciting products for real end users.
Yeah, and to prove that point, there was a cool quote that came out, which was, "Witness protection program is a government sponsored identity fraud." So I
That's
mean,
funny. Yeah.
we like I never thought about that before, but it's also a use case we have to solve, which just kind of proves the point that you're trying to make. Yes, it's the depth levels are, we're going very deep to trying to think about all the use cases where identity kind of comes in play and so on. So it was, yeah, I mean, I was really happy to spend the day with the folks in the room.
Yeah, yeah, and when you're dealing with stuff like identity, right? Especially, for instance, with this protection program, it's the stakes are very high, and so it does make sense that you know all the players, the stakeholders, want to make sure that that we do get this right. Um, any final thoughts, Micha?
Just finishing the thought that you started. To me, it seems, and I might be reading, maybe I was reading the room wrong, but to me, it seems that the governments now kind of understand that they will have to lead the charge when it comes to issuing the credentials. And we already see that with MDLs and so on. But I think it's going to happen more and more. I don't think they're going to leave it to the private sector. So, and I think that's the right thing. I think this is where credentials are issued, have been
Yep.
issued, and should be issued in the future. So,
Yeah, and especially internationally, right? I mean, I don't think I don't think a privately issued passport is going to let me travel to too many places in the future, but we'll see.
yeah.
Well, Micha, it's always a pleasure, and hope to catch up soon.
Likewise. Thank you.